Hi, buddy. Welcome to the YouTube channel here where we talk about issues related to philosophy. My name is Dave Palmer. Thanks for joining me for this interview. And I have a friend who I have worked with in radio, who is a professor of theology at the University of Dallas with me, Dr. Chris Malloy. And he has recently written a book called False Mercy, Recent Heresies Distorting Catholic Truth. And we are going to talk about the philosophical underpinnings of some of these heresies that have kind of infected the church and the world, and how philosophy plays into the book that he wrote. So, Dr. Chris Malloy, welcome. How are you?
Great. Good to be here.
So this isn't really a philosophical book, right? This is just more of a book about more theology or theological issues within the church, would you say, or moral issues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Theological. It's a theological work. It is not academic in the strict sense, nor is it popular in the broadest sense. So it's some kind of hybrid between it's accessible, but it's high-level accessible, put it that way. So got a lot of notes in there and philosophical underpinnings to some of the errors I do get into, not in detail, but sort of as a backdrop for some of the errors.
Mm-hmm. It seems like it's almost inescapable that maybe you don't highlight every single philosopher that contributed to some of the errors that we see in the church now, but there's certainly a connection, isn't there? And that's going to be something that we'll talk about. Before that, just tell me about the book and what inspired you to write it, and maybe some of the topics or chapters that you write about.
Yeah, sure. So it's the confusions of the age. So many Catholics, good Catholics, good-willed Catholics they're confused about the faith, and they don't know what the church holds. They come to me after class, some bright students, and they'll say, Dr. Malloy, is everything changing?
Yeah.
And I'll say, no. There's legitimate development. We know that. Yeah. But are the dogmas changing? Are they going away? No, they're not. But I heard this prelate say that. I heard this bishop say that. I heard there was this interview that this guy Scalfari gave with the Pope Francis, or alleges that he gave. Yeah. Is everything changing? Is no one in hell? Are souls annihilated, etc.? So that's the big first thing, is everything changing? Okay, chapter 1, dogmas, here today, gone tomorrow, ? The answer is no. They're here to stay. But then some of the specific themes, so that's like a global thing, that dogma's changing. Then the specific themes are, is hell empty? Absolutely, for sure, empty, or very likely empty, that kind of question.
Yeah.
Then things like, okay, so if hell isn't empty, maybe justification is by faith alone, so I don't need to repent. I could actually commit a mortal sin, still get to heaven without repenting. Christ a sinner, I guess that would be chapter 3. And then, is the Catholic Church not the one true church? Is the Catholic religion not the one true religion? Next 2 chapters. Mm-hmm. Is evangelization a sin? Is it nonsense? And then, is marriage not ordered to procreation? Is sodomy okay? And then chapter 10 is a smorgasbord of different topics.
Yeah.
So now what's common with these themes is what you could call false mercy, hence the title of the book. Why false mercy? Because, hell empty, justification by faith alone. In other words, it's going to be easy. It's not a big deal. This life isn't high stakes. And I respond to that saying, no, we have to obey the law. Hell is not empty. That's a little bit subtler of a discussion, to be honest. But justification is not by faith alone. That's just black and white. And of course, there's issues to bring out there. Then the thing is, if this life does have all these high stakes, how on earth are we going to do it through the sacraments of the church? Mm-hmm. So the church is the one true church. This religion that we practice is the one true religion. Therefore, we should evangelize. Hence the center of the book. How do we do it? This is what God gave us to do it. Jesus Christ and his church, the sacraments. And then the last 2 chapters are kind of the moral thing, because the new thing is now, if justification isn't by faith alone, maybe what you thought was a sin is not a sin. Maybe it's okay. Contraception's okay. It's not an absolute evil. Sodomy's okay, And then, got these things like, who am I to judge? What does that do? What do lines like that do to people on the street? They're confused. They're thinking, oh, well, I guess it is okay.
Yeah.
And you're a bigot for saying it's not okay, that kind of thing. And then chapter 10 is, as I said, a bunch of different issues. So the whole point of the book is to give Catholics confidence. Actually,
Yeah.
we face the difficulties, then I give confidence that the Church's faith hasn't failed and it won't fail.
So ultimately, it's a book about hope and just believing that the church is not, going anywhere. The church's teachings continue to be set in stone, so to speak, with some, justifiable development, as you mentioned. So do you do it from a historical standpoint, like, this is what happened, during Vatican II or after Vatican II, or this pope and that pope? I mean, is there history involved, or how do you go about kind of proving this? Just that things are not changing despite what we hear in the news.
Well, on the one hand, we've got the Troubles, and there's a kind of a history of the Troubles. So I do go into a little bit of that. I have to say I start with heavy on statistics.
Yeah.
So you've looked at the beginning there, a lot of stats, a lot of charts, graphs from reputable sociological data. And I'm obviously not a sociologist, but nonetheless, what I've done is gathered a lot of these studies together and made charts through diachronic data. In other words, how have we, especially in the United States, so that's the launching point, how have we fared statistically in terms of key signs of vitality? So that's one historical element. And you see basically a rise and then a fall.
Within the church, is that what you mean?
With the practices of the church, like, basically the analogy is if you've got some enterprise and there are, let's say, 5 things that are the heart of the enterprise, like the bottom line, number of clients, that kind of thing. So for us, it's number of priests, number of seminarians, number of nuns, marriages, baptisms, that kind of. So all those are signs of vitality.
Yeah.
Now, there's many other signs of vitality as well, but I selected some of these. These are classic signs of vitality, and we look at that. Now, the other historical aspect is for each error or heresy that I look at, I do treat, okay, so who's the best defender of position X? And so I'll go through that defense. If it's a recent defender, I'll look at the recent defender. If it's an ancient defender, then I will, or not ancient, but classical, like say Martin Luther, I'll look at him and a little bit of his context, that kind of thing. We get into evangelization, and we'll talk about that. Catholics are always shy to evangelize, but now there's an allergy. Don't evangelize. Don't impose. Yeah. Where did that come from? So
don't steal sheep, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I look at the historical. There are some lines of thought. It's not the only thing, but one line of consideration there is, how did we get to the point of don't impose on me?
Yeah.
Then there are some philosophical underpinnings.
Interesting. But ultimately, the argument hinges on the leadership of the church, because somebody may say, well, Pope Francis or the next pope could tomorrow say homosexual marriage is okay now, but you're saying no, he can't say that, and so there's a certain protection, isn't there? The Holy Spirit is protecting the church. There's a supernatural element here that won't allow a human, even if they, and again, not that these men desire that, but to change it, right? And so isn't there a certain faith that we have to have in God protecting the church in order to make your premise accurate, right?
No, absolutely. In fact, one of the classical arguments for the truth of the Catholic Church, first of all, to your point, no, sodomy can never be made okay. We're not a rule by fiat kind of community. God has already declared it in Scripture and in the magisterial tradition, and therefore it can't be changed, period. So that's one of the things I say is infallible teachings never go away. They're there. And so some people put that on limits of the papacy. That, I guess that's a fine rubric. In other words, we can be confident. The things that are taught infallibly are taught infallibly. Otherwise, they weren't taught infallibly, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a dictate, a rule by fiat. Second thing is that the classical argument for the truth of the Catholic Church is that through all these troubles, she hasn't fallen away. Mm-hmm. Right now, we're in the midst of the trouble. So what I tell my students is actually, you could say God on trial, something like this. In other words, right now, God's being kind of put to the test as by the world's circumstances, because we certainly are in troubling and interesting times as Catholics.
Yeah.
But if you, so this is where our faith does not rely on, once we come to be believers, now that's crucial. Once we come to be believers, we can no longer use reason as a crutch for our faith. It's really crucial. Vatican I says that the sons of the church are not in the same condition as unbelievers. So unbelievers are going to poke and prod. Like, what are you talking about? What happened with this, corrupt pope and or this weird thing that happened in church history? Can you explain that to me? That's the role of an unbeliever. They're supposed to do that. But you and I can't, let's put it this way. Our faith is already trembling if we're searching for reasons for the faith. Yeah. Now, nonetheless, it is, like, practically speaking, it's understandable. And let's say a teenager or something like that is going to want reasons. And so we give them reasons, but we also want them to really think about Jesus Christ, the love he has for them, and let that embolden their faith in the face of trial.
Yeah. Let's pivot to philosophy, and let's go through a few of the philosophers. I don't know if you name them in the book or refer to them, or if there's any maybe underlying teachings of these philosophers that may have infiltrated into the church for good or for bad.
Yeah.
Obviously a guy like Aquinas is clearly he's a philosopher, he's a theologian, he's weighed very heavily in the church through Council of Trent and to the modern day. But who are some other philosophers that you think have influenced for good or for bad where we are today in the church?
Yeah, that's a good question. So here's how it works: is you've got modernism at the turn of the 20th century, and then you've got kind of a newfangled modernism now. It's definitely not the same beast. So where is the philosophical influence? It's behind each of these modernisms, right? And if we were to go to one, I would say, let's talk about evangelization. Or even the claim, the Catholic Church is the one true church, the one true religion. Try to say that. Try to say that in public. I mean, we find ourselves, I don't really want to say that, kind of embarrassing. I don't want to belittle the person.
Triumphalistic.
Yeah, it's not, right. I don't want to belittle the other religion. Certainly there's truths in the other religion. By the way, all these are goodwill. These are true and good considerations. But there is an interesting line of thought behind all this, and that is there's a truth. That is the dignity of the person, the dignity of the individual. But one of the things in the story of the dignity of the individual that lies behind why we're so wary about evangelizing, Nietzsche, okay? And further back, Immanuel Kant. How do these play in? Well, Kant comes in the story in terms of morals. And one of the things he does is say that the desire for happiness is not subhuman, but how shall I say it? Insufficiently human. It doesn't make one good. And doing things on the basis of the desire of happiness doesn't make you good. But you teach Aquinas all the time, and you know that Aquinas has said this is the foundation of the moral life. Right. So, but for Kant, no, happiness is kind of it's a self-centered thing. It's not like Aquinas. Happiness is friendship. You and I coming into relationship, us and God coming into relationship. For Kant, happiness seems to be more like a low level, like I want a bigger lot, I want a bigger refrigerator, kind of that kind of thing. And so he's thinking, okay, if you do things for the sake of happiness, you're just doing it for the sake of yourself. There's nothing noble and good about that. So he's kind of poo-pooing the search for happiness. And he says you just have to do duty for its own sake. Yeah. That's what makes you good. All right. So, by the way, Luther's behind that. Not that Kant had immediately was influenced by Luther, but in the Protestant milieu is this deep unease with the desire for happiness. Okay, so this is in the background. Now, just think in terms of what Kant is doing. in terms of your desire to be excellent, to excel, to how about a community? A community wants to be excellent, to excel. Let's say it's a university. Let's say it's your enterprise. Let's say it's a nation. Then if a nation not to belittle other nations, but to excel, to do really well. Well, if you take Kant's philosophy, it sounds like we should be pretty uneasy about that and suspicious. Now enter Nietzsche. This is very interesting. The Christian, you can see the Christians, Catholic and Protestant, reading Kant, or not reading Kant, reading people that he influences, and being disturbed and looking at themselves and saying, you know what? A lot of what I do is for the sake of happiness. That must make me subhuman.
Yeah.
I need to be disinterested and love others, not because I like them, but just for their own sake. By the way, there's some grains of truth here. You see how complicated. But if I say, just a question mark on Kant, Kant would want you to love your wife only for her good and not at all because you like being with her.
Serving her, right?
Yeah, but that sounds all romantic. And some people very easily are duped by this. Tell this to your wife. I love you because I want what's good for you, not because I enjoy being with you.
Yeah.
No, seriously, this is something deeply, profoundly wrong in Kant. And we understand that selfishness is bad. That's granted. So if I were to love my wife for my sake and to subject her to my good, we know that's a problem. But Kant gives us this sterile kind of like, it's not that I want to be with you. I'm blind. I'm totally blind to that. I just want your good, whatever that may be. But I don't want to be with you. What? Yeah. So this is the heart of Catholic, is I want to be with you. That's what Aquinas meant by happiness, is I want to be with God. I want to be with you. Yeah. All right. Now, enter a reaction to that. If you've got a lot of Christians infected by Kant and, by the way, that background Protestant idea, or somewhat Protestant idea.
It's almost kind of a guilt, right? It's
exactly.
Like, it's a guilt about doing nice things because some of it may come back and make me feel good about, and I shouldn't feel that way. Almost like what you're talking about, the premise being the Catholic Church being the one true church. And I feel guilty saying that because I need to make everybody else feel good about themselves, right?
This is like, I'm just inflating my own ego if I say the Catholic Church is the one true church.
Yeah.
Because obviously I'm the author of the Catholic Church if I'm evangelizing for her. What? Where did we get that? No, but here's where Nietzsche comes in. Nietzsche goes and says, you Christians, by the way, it's not the true Catholic idea, but he does think, and he's diagnosing a Protestant error. You Christians think that true love is total self-abnegation, where you grovel and you just will the good of the other, and you don't desire goodness yourself. And then Nietzsche goes, wait a minute. We want excellence. We want to flourish. We want to be like orange. What does an orange tree want to do? It wants to produce the yummiest, it doesn't want to be a runt. So that's what we want. We want to be artists that are, filled with life. By the way, insofar as Nietzsche has that in his idea, he's onto a lot of truth. And he says that's the way the pagans used to live. But then the Jews and the Christians came on the scene. They made everyone feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
He's reading Christianity and Judaism through the very dark eyes of the Protestant critique.
I think his dad was a Protestant preacher, as I recall.
That doesn't surprise me. I know he was Protestant.
Yeah.
So he calls Paul the disevangelist because he's aware. By the way, Protestantism deeply rooted in Paul, a wrong reading of Paul.
Yeah.
But so now, what does Christians do when Nietzsche says, "Hey, that's a lie. You're all hypocrites"? When you, in fact, try to grovel and be like holy priests and wear the sackcloth and all that, what you guys are doing is actually trying to make other people feel guilty so that they give up their power and you can be the winners. And so your whole game is a will to power anyway. Everybody's out for power. Some people do it straightforwardly, like the ancient pagans, and some people are crooked jerks, and that's the Christians. Okay, so what do the Christians do when they read Nietzsche? There are books about this. they wind up whipping themselves all the more. They say, man, he's so right. And they wind up hating themselves even more. Instead of learning and saying, wait a minute, the desire for happiness is good. Nietzsche had a good point, even though he got it a little bit off, quite a bit off. He had a good point. We need to correct this weird distaste for true love of self. No, we doubled down on guilt. And so we're in this very convoluted sense where if I go and say to you, hey, living that way is wrong, that's just a will to power on my part. I'm oppressing you.
Yeah.
And that's where we get this relativism.
That's interesting how that Nietzsche and Kant play into this, even influencing in the modern age. Let me ask you, this just popped into my mind, the existentialists. I guess you'd have people like Sartre would be an existentialist, and Kierkegaard. And my understanding of existentialism is that existence precedes essence, right? So it's almost like you create, you're born with existence, and then you kind of create who you are, right? That seems to really be in people are boys, and they want to be girls, or I want to just kind of create my own gender or my own reality. And now, is that, would you say that there's some existentialism that is infecting the church right now that might be influenced by some of these philosophers?
Well, some of the mindsets that go with existentialism, I think, are. So, you could take it back all the way to the killer of nature, William of Ockham.
Yeah.
And so there are various thinkers that downplay nature, and this connects with Kant in that nature is ordered to an end, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a concept of nature, it's not just that you have a static nature; it's ordered to development and to a specific kind of end, and so it needs to be nurtured and tended along those ways. If you deny nature, then the thing is, what are we doing tomorrow? Whatever you want to do, unless there's a kind of nasty, tyrannical person in power who says you ought not to do that. Now, so people who say that there's no such thing as nature, and then who say we have to do what God wants, they kind of present God like he just sets up some hoops for us we have to pass. They don't have anything to do with my good. I just have to do them because he wants me to do them. I better do them because he's in power, otherwise I'll go to hell.
Right.
So the existentialist now would play in with, I don't think immediately, but they're a part of that denial of nature. It's the person, not the nature.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that think that, and it's my freedom, my person freedom, not the nature.
Yeah, well, I spoke to Dr. Knoebel from the philosophy department a little while ago, and she was talking about the Utilitarians, the Bentham and Mill. She pointed out, I don't know a lot about them, but certainly we see a utilitarianism in the, just kind of do whatever is most effective, and I don't know. It just the more we talk about this, the more people pop into my mind. Karl Marx. What about him? He seems a bit problematic to Catholicism. How has his philosophy might have impacted the kind of things you write about in the book?
Not so much immediately things I write about in the book, but I would say one of the big things that we're dealing with now is liberation theologies, right? And there are various stripes. There's classical liberation theology, and then there's, transgenderism, feminism, transgenderism. I got some interesting quotes I want to read to you in connection with that. But basically, I did bring the...
Is that Marx?
This is the manifesto, all right? So these are some of the goals. Just briefly, I don't want to read the whole thing, but these are some of the goals. First, abolition of property in land and application of rents to public purposes. Heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax, abolition of all right of inheritance, confiscation of the property of emigrants and rebels, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank and a central exclusive monopoly, centralization of the means of communication and transport, etc. So one of the things that Marx foments is revolution and class antagonisms, right? And he really wants them. So he talks about different kinds of weak socialism socialisms, I'll call them. And I think you would put someone like Mother Teresa in that category. People who are worried about the plight of the poor and they kind of try to Band-Aid it. All right. He doesn't want Band-Aids. He wants that experience of poverty to kind of be raw and then rebel.
Yeah.
And so you get a revolution and then control the means of production, that kind of thing. So he would be fomenting revolution anywhere and everywhere against any existing principle of order. That's pretty radical, and you can see that rules for radicals, right?
Yeah.
And the great rebel Lucifer. So that's a problem. Now, liberation theology, say late '60s, Medellin and later conferences and whatnot. Comes on the scene in the Catholic world, and basically what it is Marx with a lot of Catholic theology in it, but a confusion. And so what they promote when you read between the lines is revolution. And they're not interested in Band-Aids. They think that if you get too many of these Franciscans taking care of people, you're going to prevent the revolution. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, St. Francis transformed Italy by nonviolent means.
Yeah.
This is kind of holding it back for the Marxists,
Yeah, interesting. So there's no place for altruism. It's people need to pick themselves up. They need to revolt. They need to band together and destroy the upper class and kind of even everything out, right? Rather than somebody actually helping another person and trying to lift them up. There doesn't seem to be a lot of room for charity.
There's no room for charity.
Yeah.
But charity is, you see, one individual to another, and they're really interested in the whole systemic problem.
Yeah.
And and there are systemic problems, but nonetheless, they think all charity is a salve to keep the systemic problem in place. So what you really want is your own property and no revolution. But what needs to happen is all the people in the street need to take your property. Mm-hmm. And then the government needs to own it, basically. So, so I'd say, these are altruism. Well, the interesting thing is, once again, I come back to that whole Kant thing, because Marxists are amazingly non-selfish in a certain lens. If you look at them in a certain lens, they don't care if they die for the cause. They care about the cause. Uh-huh. So they're very much interested in, they think this order is the future developing order of the communist ideal through the socialism, through the socialist stage is going to be, that's what we're gunning for. Okay. Mm-hmm. So they're willing to sacrifice for the cause. That, in a certain lens, that looks like altruistic, right? And versus the, cigar smoking bourgeois, whomever. But one of the problems is, again, a failure to understand happiness in the true sense. And I haven't mentioned it yet, but common good. So when we talk about being with another as my happiness, that's a common good. It binds us together. Yeah. Our being together as friends is a good that we can only have together. Our being together as a family of human beings is a good that we can only have in connection with each other. So precisely the being together is the good. Mm-hmm. Now, I grant it, in our culture, we're very economically successful and all that. So our tendency is to focus on getting another billiard table, more pizza, that kind of thing. So we're setting our sights on low-level goods that are not common goods. I mean, the billiard table can bring a few people together, but you see, not everybody can fit around it. So if all our goods are low-level goods, then we're necessarily going to have a divisive society. Mm-hmm. And so Pope Leo the 13th talks about this. All right. So hence the Marxists they're thinking not in terms of the common good, but they're still on these low-level goods. They just want equal distribution.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So what's the answer? False mercy, recent heresies distorting Catholic truth. they read the book and they understand that the church teachings cannot change, but at the same time we're looking around and we're saying, gosh, not many people are getting the message. Is the answer to just understand that this is the case and we just kind of deal with these heresies because they're out there, but we know they're not really going to have they're heresies and they're not the truth? Or what is it? Is it just educating people better? What's how do we get past the situation? Because it's not a good situation right now in the church.
No. I mean, to think of the individual, I think it's getting a good catechism.
Yeah.
Like John Hardin's catechism.
Yeah.
You can read, of course, the new catechism of the church. It's very difficult to read. It's hard for the individual to read. That's why something like a John Hardin. I like Ludwig Ott, Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma.
Yeah.
It's a little bit dated, so it doesn't have some new things, but it has all the old things.
Yeah.
It's really nice, approachable. You can read that. So you want to get to know your catechism. Cardinal Burke's been talking about this.
Yeah.
That's the answer. We have to know our true faith.
Mm-hmm.
We also need to pray. We need to become people of prayer. We can't lose hope. And that's our energy. We need to stay close with Christ. Collectively, then, I don't know, form small groups. I don't have a recipe on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know that we need to know the faith and, pray for our bishops and priests. I mean, the devil's after them.
Yeah.
And he's after everybody, but he's concentrating his efforts on good families and priests and bishops.
All right. Where can people find the book? It was published by Sophia Press, right?
Yeah, Sophia Institute.
Okay.
So False Mercy, you can get it at sophiainstitute.com or at amazon.com.
All right. Very good. Dr. Chris Malloy, Associate Professor of the Theology Department at the University of Dallas. And interesting conversation. Pick up a copy of the book, and you can see all of the philosophical underpinnings that we talked about in this interview. Thank you very much. Good talking with you.
Great talking with you. Thanks, Dave.